Welcome to Soundstage Insider, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the film and television industry. We're bringing you the visionary directors and producers, the talented cinematographers, editors, sound designers, and more who really make the magic happen. We delve deep into their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. So let's go beyond the red carpet and discover a fascinating world of behind-the-scenes talent. Hello there, welcome to the podcast. My name's Jamie, and today we are diving headfirst into the world of stunt performers with none other than the legendary Sam Hargrave. But before we jump into our interview with Sam, let's take a moment to appreciate the rich history of stunt performers in Hollywood. Dating back to the early days of silent films, these daredevils have been an integral part of the industry, bringing jaw-dropping action sequences to life on the silver screen. Back in the early 1900s, pioneers like Helen Gibson and Yakima Canutt paved the way for stunt performers, defying gravity and pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. Their dedication, skill, and sheer audacity captivated audiences, earning them the respect and admiration of their peers. Over the years, as the film industry grew and evolved, so did the role of stunt performers. They became indispensable members of the filmmaking process, developing new techniques, refining safety protocols, and continually raising the bar for what could be achieved in the realm of action and adventure. From thrilling car chases to epic fight sequences, from high falls to fiery explosions, stunt performers risk life and limb to create the heart-pounding moments that keep us on the edge of our seats. They are the unsung heroes who often go unrecognized, allowing the actors they double for to shine in the spotlight. Today, I'm interviewing Sam Hargrave, a true master of his craft. With over 2 decades of experience in the industry, Sam has worked as a stunt performer, coordinator, and in recent years he's enjoyed enormous success in the director's chair, or should I say more accurately, directing while strapped to the hood of a car. His credits include some of the biggest action blockbusters in recent years, such as Avengers Endgame, Deadpool 2, Extraction, and the eagerly anticipated follow-up Extraction 2, which premieres in the US June 16th on Netflix. I'm very excited to talk to you today about Extraction 2. Like I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, I saw it last night, absolutely loved it. It was a riot from start to finish. But we're going to get to that shortly, but I'd love to go back in time and sort of find out your origin story a little bit in this industry. I know, you've done a ton of work as a stunt performer and a coordinator, and obviously now as a director. So what were your first forays into this industry, and how did you get there?
That's a great question, and it's settle in for a long answer. No, I won't make it that long. But I started, we can go way back to when I was a young lad in North Carolina. I grew up with an older sister, younger brother on a farm in North Carolina, and I was heavily influenced by movies and TV shows. Didn't have like cable when we were out in the middle of nowhere, but we did have. My granddad had cable, and he would record these reruns of shows on VHS. And so we would get, old Roy Rogers, Gene Autry shows. We would get The Lone Ranger. We would get, copies. These are VHS copies sent to my mom, and she'd play them for us. Of Zorro, the old Disney Zorro. So I would watch these things, and as a young, I'm probably 6, 7, 8 years old, I'm watching and imitating what I see on the screen, so much so that my mom has to learn how to edit between 2 VHS machines, 2 VCRs, to remove things that I might do and end up killing my younger brother doing it. So which is interesting, it was just super fascinating to go back and watch movies now that I remember back then, but I remember them very differently because they were edited for content for my consumption. Yeah. So anyway, very influenced by that. So I'd end up, my brother, even my sister, corral them into helping me make these little movies. We had a little video camera. I'd end up directing them. I had my sister shoot them, and my brother's a little younger, so he and I would, duke it out. And so we'd end up doing some sort of fight scene or some sort of shootout with our little, fake guns. And I was probably 8 or 9 years old. Flash forward to, and knowing nothing about movies, just literally imitating what we saw on screen and just doing the best we could. Flash forward to, a couple years later, and I'm 14 years old when I get introduced to martial arts. And, started just have some social interaction and get some energy out. My mom's like, yeah, get out of the house. And, so I start with Taekwondo, and that was the beginning of the end, so to speak, because it was through that I was introduced to Hong Kong cinema. And when I saw my first Jackie Chan movie, I was hooked. And that was it. I mean, I just, all I wanted to do was martial arts. I was training at the dojo, and all the way up, even through college. I went to college at UNC Chapel Hill. I actually lived at the martial arts school, and in exchange for cleaning the place and teaching classes, I could stay there for free while I went to school. And while there, my daily routine was I'd wake up in the morning, I'd throw in a VHS copy of a Jackie Chan fight scene, cued to that fight scene, of course, and I'd watch it while I ate breakfast, rewind it because it had to be ready for when I got back for lunch, because then I'd take off to school, go through some classes, come back, put in, another fight scene, watch it while I ate lunch, go back to school, bike back. And then for dinner, guess what I did? I'd put in another movie and I'd watch it. So I was just voraciously consuming this art form of Hong Kong fight scenes and the falls and the way they'd shoot and edit. And that was priming my mind for this foray into Hollywood that I really had no idea existed. I was fairly short-sighted not just visually, but like mentally as a youth. And it was all about what I could do in the now. It's like, okay, I can make movies, and that's what I want to do. I want to write, direct, act in, like I'm going to be Jackie Chan. And so that was it. I was going to make movies and didn't know where or how, but that's what I was going to do. And a friend of mine, Thayer Harris, who incidentally second unit directed Extraction and Extraction 2. We've known each other since we were 14 years old. He was the one who said, you've gotten pretty good at falling on your head. You could actually make money doing that in Hollywood, so you don't have to, be sleeping on couches and mooching off people for the rest of your life. Like, start a career. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. And so I did. I packed up my Honda Civic and I drove across country. And I started sleeping on couches and just inquiring, like, how do you get into stunts? How do you get into stunts? Knocking on doors, going to gyms and gymnastic schools, martial arts dojos, and just trying to figure it out. And so that was the beginning of the stunt career in Hollywood, all with the future aim of becoming a director. Like, I knew I wanted to tell stories. I knew I wanted to direct movies. It's just at the time I was, young and bendy and had like physical abilities, and I wanted to be the stuntman side of Jackie Chan. Yeah. And so I got a lot of amazing opportunities in that. I worked on a lot of big, cool movies, which, I'll pause there just so we can catch our breaths and maybe there's another question. But that was the start. What got me to Hollywood from North Carolina was inspired by movies, TV shows, and Louis L'Amour books. I forgot to mention that was one of my favorite authors growing up, and he always had an awesome fist fight and a gunfight in his books, and that was another inspiration. So through that, led to martial arts, led to film school, and led to making my own projects, which were always action-oriented, and then I was westward bound.
Wow. So, I mean, obviously you were extremely motivated and hustled a lot, but were there any particular qualities that you possessed, do you think, outside of those things that set you apart, that really got you the gigs, or was it something else?
I was painfully average, and that was helpful, which was, I mean, my looks, my height, background. I was, a 6 foot tall, 175 pound white dude in Hollywood. A lot of actors that you could double. So, and I had a specific skill set, but then I just was very fortunate because contrast, and not being glib about it, but it's just the way that my cookie crumbled. I didn't control that. That just happened to me. Whereas I've known a lot of people much more talented than me. Like my friend, Thayer Harris, in so many ways, so much more talented. It just so happens he's 5'8", kind of a very character looking, guy. looks very kind of Eastern European. Not as many leading doubling roles for him in Hollywood. Like it's just harder. And even to fight the lead, who's probably 6 foot, they don't want to pick on the small guy. So that's not fair. That's not, that's just unfortunately he's made a great career. I don't want to, say woe is there, but that's just kind of the natural way of it. How I found it, I was very lucky to be average. Like I was average heights, average looks, average abilities. I fit in amongst the kind of Hollywood.
Yeah, but average in Hollywood is kind of like a little higher than the rest of the world, right?
Right. Now that's in looks, right? Like look wise, height, build, just like it could morph into a lot of different things. I could play taller, play shorter. And then the specificity, like besides hustling, like the skill set that I think helped propel me forward came from that 10,000 hours of watching those Jackie Chan movies and then going to film school and spending so much time studying that and filming it and doing it. Like you only get better at something by doing it. And so we made short film after short film after short film, whether it was for class or not. It was just me and my friends making these things. And so we got better and we got better and we kept doing it. And it was, the drive, but also the intentional learning of that skill set that I knew I wanted to use. That was, I think, was the skill set that helped propel me, because I would get invited on movies for the run of the show, not just because I could double the lead and do some fights and falls. Is I was also playing a second role, which was at that time, this thing was coming into prominence called the stunt viz or fight viz, where the stunt team would choreograph, shoot, and edit their version of the action from the script and hand that to the director and say the visual representation of this is what your action could look like. And because I knew cameras and I knew editing software and, sound and all that stuff, I became kind of a go-to guy on those movies. And so I kind of had job security. So even if I couldn't double someone on that show, or maybe I didn't have all the skills, I could still be on the run of show because I could shoot reliably and, quickly shoot and turn over these things. And it was help make the stunt team look good and helps the directors visualize their movie and give them something to choose from.
And do you think the fact that you had that almost third-person perspective on your work, because you were such a fan of the genre that you can visualize it outside of your own performance, if that makes sense, rather than like a martial arts person just coming in to shoot a scene, you have that a bigger picture sense of what's going on?
Definitely. Even to the point where when we were training in martial arts, we humorously called our video cameras, called it Sensei Sony, because we'd put up this camera and we weren't just doing things because it felt right or because someone told us to. It became all about how it looked and how it worked. So we would put this up and we would be doing a fight scene and it might feel good. You're like, aha, like I punch is really fast, but then you look at it and like, I can't even see that I'm punching. I'm not extending my punch and I'm not twisting my hips. And so you would look at it and it would rewire the way that you actually practiced so that it would look better for camera, because ultimately that's what we wanted to do, is perform for the camera. So that became our instructor, was like watching ourselves back. And so I had many experiences of, being like, oh man, self-critical, being like, man, this is terrible. I thought I was like a black belt. I'm terrible. I got to work on these kicks more. So it pushed us to practice harder and specifically for the camera. So that was very helpful in my career.
Yeah, love that. Just as a side note, in your various forays around Hollywood, have you ever met Jackie Chan? Have you met him?
Never, and it's on my bucket list to meet that man and just say thank you for kicking off my career and kind of inspiring me to be where I am today. That would be, it's on the list. Cool.
Really super basic question. How badly have you hurt yourself? How many injuries have you sustained? Like, presumably a lot, right?
Yeah, every stuntman gets banged up, and stuntwoman. I've been very fortunate not to have any major injuries, which I would classify as, hospitalizations or surgeries. I've broken many bones. I have torn many muscles. I think that probably the worst thing, if you were to classify it, would probably be the, head trauma, like concussions. I've had more of those than is probably healthy for a human being to have. And so that it got to where, in later years where the lights go out faster, like it's once you're, it's in the fighting world, it's called getting like a glass jaws, like your body intuitively, it's like, oh, if we're going to get rocked like that, we're going to shut everything down to protect ourselves. And so now it takes less and less of that to shut down. And so it got to the point where it wouldn't, it was harder to get through a show without having a head injury. And so it was like, time to probably shift more towards the stunt coordinating and directing side of things.
Yeah. And we're going to move on to that, but I still have a few more questions about stunt work.
Yeah, do it like that. It's so funny. Just as a quick aside, I think it's one of the most funniest things where I, go direct a movie. It does great things for Netflix. And then if you tell somebody, oh, I direct movies, they go, oh, that's fun. And then you tell them you're a stunt man. I did stunts for Captain America. They're like, oh my gosh, tell me all about it. Like, that's amazing. So that card, the stuntman card, or those questions is much more interesting to the general public than directing.
So are there any kinds of stunts that particularly scare you? Are you not a heights guy, or like, is there anything that particularly you don't like and you steer away from?
No, not really. I mean, because my approach to stunts was, and kind of to life is, I like learning new things. I like new challenges. There are some stunts that I haven't been able to do just because that wasn't my specialty and I didn't have the time or, to learn them. And so I wouldn't be asked to do them, which would put someone else or myself at risk. That I'm not the guy they're going to call if they need someone to jump out of an airplane, and land safely. They've got other friends that could do that. I'm not the guy they're going to call if you want someone to ride a wheelie on a motorcycle through the set and land it right next to an actor. That's not my. Now I can ride a motorcycle, I can drive cars, like at the basic level, but my specialty, the kind of focus that got me a lot of work and where my passion was in fights, falls, and wire stunts, was kind of, and which makes sense, my background and with martial arts and my love for Hong Kong cinema. So that was my inspiration. So it kind of makes sense. That was where I spent most of my time, got most of my jobs. That was my focus.
So you mentioned about getting better at being a stunt person. Where do you go to learn to get better? How do you figure that out? Like, it's not something you can go to the gym for, right?
It's really crazy that there isn't a more institutionalized version of stunts or certification for coordinators or performers. There are in different countries, but I'm just referring to, so anybody in the UK or Australia, different places, this is a different reality. I'm speaking from my experience, which was the United States. It's kind of the Wild West, meaning there was no certification. There was no, place, school you go to and say, oh, I'm certified from such and such a place. And people go, well, that means something. There are different stunt schools around the country, and I'm not knocking on them because it's a great place for people to start. But that doesn't hold a lot of weight. Crazily, it's a reputation-based business and kind of a put up or shut up kind of thing, where it's like, if you have the skills, then you'll get hired again, and it's kind of reputation based, where this guy he can get it done safely. The crazy thing is, how do they know that? Well, the right way, there's no process other than, like, the one I used to get in was I put together a stunt reel. So I had all these short films that I'd done, and I had, like Thayer said, I fall on my head pretty good. I had a bunch of crazy falls in real life situations. So I didn't do a lot in the gyms, right? Like a lot of reels and stuff that I would see guys doing these falls and these crazy acrobatic falls, but in a gym, like a gymnastics gym, onto mats. I was like, well, I'm never going to do that in a movie. Let's go do it in the real world. So it'd be onto concrete. A lot of my major injuries came not on big movies where I was getting paid. It was me just trying to prove myself and to the world that I could do this stuff. So crazy falls, like we'd find old construction sites and do a fight scene and then, fall off the second story, hit here, and then fall to the ground. And you're like, why would you do that? It's like, well, because they did it in Hong Kong movies. I wanted to challenge myself. So I developed a stunt reel that was like, 90 seconds long on a DVD at that time, and of just me fighting and falling in the real world environment. And I would send that out to people, and they'd see it and be like, you crazy? And I'm like, yeah, maybe. And I got an opportunity to, I guess, show my stuff on this TV show, Supernatural, that was the pilot was shooting in LA. I got asked to double Jensen Ackles, and that was the first in, if you will. And then I, just met some other people, got hired, this large call for stunt people on Pirates of the Caribbean 2, I think. Well, they shot 2 and 3 together, so it was 2 and 3, and it was at Universal Studios, and it was 150, 200 stunt performers. Wow. Men, women, everybody. And it was just, there's so many stunts in that movie. So they were just like, oh, you'll do, come on, yep, come on, yep, you. And I got an opportunity, very gratefully, to work on that show. And when you have that many stunt performers around you, if you get the opportunity to perform a stunt, people see it. And then, people remember it and they talk about it or whatever. And so that was the start of me gaining reputation for being a guy who would, take some pretty crazy, wild falls and who could do some pretty decent fight scenes. And so word spreads, and then the next thing you know, when someone's talking, they say, hey, we need a guy to fall off this thing. And they're like, well, this guy, Sam did it in this show that I saw him do. They want you to call him. So you get a phone call and you go up, you do that job well. And then it starts to build momentum and off you go. But to answer your question, it's not like you go and say, hey, I'm certified from, the so-and-so stunt school. I'm a stunt man. It's like, it doesn't happen that way. I'm a stunt man suddenly because I got an opportunity. Someone gave me a chance. I performed well. And then people talked about it and I got another chance and I just kept doing that. It's really wild in the States how that works.
You don't get the falling off of a thing badge or
no, it's crazy. It's crazy. Not in the US. Like I said, there's other and I know there's the stunt registry in the UK. There's different places that have a more formal grading system. So you do have to qualify, but not in the US, which is wild.
Is stunts covered under SAG-AFTRA or is it a different union?
It's all under the same umbrella. Yeah, it's acting, stunts, and background performing, which is kind of wild, but all same union.
So we're sort of morphing towards your directorial work, but still as a stunt performer working with a director, do you find they ask for more outrageous stunts than you can deliver, or are you pushing the director to go further often, or is it just case by case?
Well, usually if you're on a set with the stunt coordinator who's worth their salt, they're not going to let you or hire someone who's unable to do the stunt that is needed for the show, because that becomes someone could get hurt. That becomes an insurance like a liability claim. Yeah. And then just you lose time and money because the production is affected by that. Usually people can get in trouble sometimes by lying on a resume saying, oh yeah, I do high falls, and then they're like, great. Where now you're falling off of that building and you're like, actually the highest fall I did was off of my bed. And then, now you put people in a tough situation. So, I never did that. I tried to be very, forthright with my abilities because I didn't want anybody to get hurt, myself included. So usually in my experience, I was the one who would see, have a situation come up and I would be trying to do more than was asked. Mostly because I'm just in life, I'm trying to push the envelope, and it's like, this poem that my dad, read me as a kid. I don't know the whole poem anymore, but by Edgar Guest it's called Good Enough. Like basically it's like, beware of good enough, because you could stop there and it's like keeping you from being great. Yeah. So it was always like, oh, we can do more, we can go faster, or we can and that is a dangerous game to play. And I learned some, lessons along the way from more experienced people of there's a balance. You may want to push it for your own sake, but the general audience is not going to know the difference between, a double twisting backflip and just a single. Like, do what you can do repeatedly, do what you can do safely, and the people aren't going to know the difference. So again, there's a balance between pushing the envelope and doing things that haven't been done before, and then just remembering that it's a profession and you want to do this for many years. But I would rock onto it, and I'd get upset if I wasn't allowed to. I'd rock on a set, and I go, oh, it's like, okay, you're supposed, you get shot, and the idea is you get shot, and you're supposed to just tumble down the stairs. You go, okay. But if I went over the railing, I could clip that statue, then hit this glass thing, go off the edge of the ship, and fall another 30 feet. And they're like, that's fantastic. However, the camera is here, so if you do that, no one's going to see it. So that's great. Just settle down, kid. That was usually, my sense. But then what was really cool, transitioning, I got to utilize that kind of desire to make things bigger when I was doing, just a quick side story, when I was coordinating Captain America Civil War and doubling Captain America, kind of a twofer there. There was a stunt as scripted where there was an explosion and Captain America, flies out a window and lands on the concrete. And I read that and I was like, oh, that's cool. What if it's like we were to have, like, say there's a balcony and he goes through the glass, he clips the edge of the balcony, he goes backwards and he hits this awning, and so he falls from the awning down to a truck to the ground, and that's when he hits the concrete. And the Russos are like, can you do that? I was like, don't you leave that to me, but if you like the idea, yeah. And they're like, sure, great. And so that's one time, I mean, many other times in my career, but a memorable one where I got to like push the envelope, make it a little bigger. And it totally inspired by Hong Kong action cinema, like that multi-level fall. Got to oversee the building of it, like doing the math to like angle it just the right way, put pads in just the right place, do the disc. So we, from conception to building it to then actually doing the stunt or second half of it, the other stunt double who was doubling Cap, Jackson Spidell, did the first part because he's way better on a wire and it just looked better. And that's an interesting moment. Story within a story is like that moment where you're sitting there in charge and you're face to face with your ego. And your ego says, I want to do that stunt because I want the glory. But your rational brain says that's not the best thing for the movie. This guy actually does that better than me. And so to admit that to yourself while on the set in the middle of all this stuff and go, you know what? It's okay because it's the character and that's what the audiences see. Share it with the guy. Like he gets to get on screen, and we actually ended up sharing a World Stunt Award for that stunt. So it was actually a really cool moment of growth, being there and just realizing that you're not the guy in this moment. You do the second part, the part that's a little easier, gravity, just fall and gravity will take care of the rest. So I did half of the stunt, the second half. But anyway, so creating that thing and showing up on set and wanting to do bigger and better than the director had envisioned, that was something I really enjoyed doing in the stunt world.
Love that. And interestingly, you mentioned about the sort of persona of a stunt person. Is there a persona that stunt people tend to have? Presumably they're not desperate for attention because you're somewhat unrecognized a lot of the time compared to the protagonist of the movie.
Yeah. I mean, there is. I mean, you get kind of the classic one is like, the daredevil who just wants to do crazy stuff and, go out and drink beers and get crazy. I always, it was half true, meaning like I always wanted to do crazy things and push myself. I'm sure all of us are striving for some level of attention, at a deep level. Hollywood draws out some very interesting, characters for that. I think for that reason, because it is about in that moment, the attention is on you. Yes, it's the actor and people go like, oh, that was cool. But in that moment, everybody's looking at you and everybody's like, it's all about you. And then afterwards, if you do it right, and survive it, you get a round of applause. And so it feels good. So I definitely think you're chasing that dopamine hit for sure. But the persona that, I tried to embody was more of like the filmmaker who, yes, it was the athlete who's trying to push the envelope, but the filmmaker who's trying to get the great shot. Yeah. And so if that meant, that I had to do something that was going to suck repeatedly, I would go, you know what? It's worth it because film is forever. That's like in the mindset. Rather than like, oh, let's, watch me do this cool stuff because I'm the best. It was more like, if it's going to make the movie better, that's super cool. And sure, the added bonus is I got to do something cool that looks great on my reel, or people go talk about it years later and go, wow, that was crazy what, Sam did. But ultimately, the basis for me was what can I do to make the movie better? Because I wanted to replicate the things I saw as a kid. Like, that was just really impressive action. The feeling I got. No, I still get it. When I'll YouTube a Hong Kong fight scene if I'm feeling down or need some inspiration. And I still, to this day, get that little just feeling in my stomach of excitement seeing those performers do that thing. And so if I can provide that for someone else, that's a huge win.
So let's bring it back to Extraction. Extraction 2 is the new movie. Presumably, and I'm making a leap here, but the intent was to take things up a notch, and it's quite a challenge from the first one, right? For one thing, it was hugely successful. You tell me, what was the intent when you started out with this movie?
Extraction 2 came about because of the success of the first one. The fans made it happen. We didn't necessarily intend to make a sequel. It was just the reaction that was so positive and we saw the potential for a franchise or a series that Netflix could have and be proud of, that we all could be proud of. And so it was the fans that made it happen. So in the second one, all sequels set out to do better than the first, I would imagine. Like I wasn't, it's like very few people have the goal of making a subpar sequel.
Yeah.
So for us, the goal was very similar, I think, to everyone. But when we got really specific about it, upping the ante on the action was kind of a given, in that, we did the first movie, it got a lot of attention, and, the Warner was a big thing. So we're like, all right, we got to do something like that, but bigger and better. And how do we put Tyler Rake in situations that would be even more difficult to get out of? And that was kind of a given, an exciting challenge. More importantly for Joe and Chris and me was emotionally, like what for the character of Tyler Rake, how do we push him even further? Because we kind of, the first one kind of got to it's like a 10. You're losing a child and you leave them to, because you're scared of being there. That's a pretty high thing, a pretty elevated emotional stakes. So how do we top that? How do we round that out? What do we do to continue that? Or how do we make audiences feel something like they hopefully did on the first movie? So that was actually the most challenging part, was how do we learn more about Tyler Rake without being repetitive? How do we top the emotional stakes without, giving somebody else cancer that's dying? Like, how do you make it interesting and relatable? And so that a lot of the work went into that aspect, is the storytelling, because as crazy and as cool as the action is, if we don't care about the character, it's harder for people to relate to and be inspired by the action, or even make it through the movie, to be honest. Like, if they don't care, they're gonna pause it and be like, next, I'm gonna watch whatever. Tiger King, that was when we were competing with TigerKing the first time. Oh, really? I don't know if they're doing another one now, but whatever that Tiger King equivalent is, I changed the channel and watch that now. So it was definitely
Succession, maybe.
Succession. Yeah, I'd be like, yep, now that's more exciting. Because, and why is it that people love Succession? Because of the character development, because there's stakes, and there's these moments where you're like, oh my gosh, what would I do? Or like, I would never do that, but would I? It makes you think about your own morality, your own humanity, and just kind of you relate to these people on screen. And so I think the reason people would want to watch that over a lot of action movies is because of that. So we tried to give it. Now, I'm not comparing us to Succession. All of you Succession fans out there, in no way am I comparing the two, but the comparison, I think, is valid in that the reason Succession is successful is because of the character development, and you care about these people. And so we tried to emulate that formula in Extraction. It's like, make a character, and not just Tyler Rake, with Nick Khan and Yaz, and her brother Yaz, and the villains and the family that's being rescued. All of these characters have their own stories, and try to make them relatable, and make each one of them have a journey that we as audience members can relate to, or root for them in some way. Yeah.
And presumably pacing is crucially important to a movie like this, but that has such intense action sequences. If it was just wall to wall, the intensity would be lost, it would be gradually diminished. So having those sort of light and shade moments is sort of a key to the impact of the action, right?
Very much so. Yeah, the pacing in an action movie, it's like a musical piece, right? If it's just, if you're just flat out, use a bluegrass as an example, you're just flat picking these crazy notes the whole time, and there's no break, there's no resting moment. It all just becomes a lot of noise, and so it's the great musical movements that have this melodic up and down, and fast and slow, and moments of rest, moments of tension. And so we tried to do the same with Extraction 2. The challenge was the action pieces, because we had this crazy set piece, or a couple of crazy set pieces, that took up a lot of screen time. And traditionally they'd be a little shorter, and it would be a little more spread out. So you'd have just a little more of that up and down. We had these 3 huge action set pieces. So then we had to figure out a way to pace that out and puts things in between. And it was a very interesting challenge editorially, and even just shooting it conceptually, because the pacing is a little different than, a lot of action movies, because of the sizable chunk of these sequences that just kind of come one in into the first act, into the second, and then boom, one at the end, kind of middle of the second act, and then one in the third act. It's like, whoa, just huge action set pieces. But hopefully, that we achieve that musicality.
Yeah, 100%. Well, actually diving in a little bit to one of those big action sequences. And
Yeah.
we're not going to give any plot away here, but the prison one is the one I'm referring to. That felt like a one take kind of a thing. Oh, presumably it wasn't, but I mean, how could you? But it was breathless to watch.
Everything about that sequence was exhausting.
Really?
Reading it on the page was exhausting. And then, putting it into, a digestible format for preparation was exhausting. The scouting process, finding all those locations was just a super exhaustive and yet very rewarding process.
Yeah.
And it was, and I'm glad you actually said that it felt like one take, because that's the intention of for me of the oneer is the feeling. Yeah. The how it gets done, whether you do it as all one continuous or you hide stitches in there, I think that's becomes just semantics really, because to me, this is my again I'm sure there's all kinds of people that will rip this opinion apart, but for me it's all about a feeling. And what the feeling we're trying to evoke in this cinematic experience is one of tension and immersion for the viewer, so that it feels like you are on this mission with Tyler Rake. So if we convey that feeling, the how and all that stuff is less important to me, but as long as you get that feeling, then I think we've succeeded.
Yeah, it definitely did feel like one long piece. It didn't feel like a shtick either, like sometimes with a movie where they're like, we did it all in one take, and they're really showing it off. It really just felt like one sequence of an event happening, start, middle, end,
Great.
Also, it struck me that, and this may be totally left field opinion here, but it felt almost like you were, and I mean this in the most positive way, almost like you were a protagonist in a video game. Like you were so integral into the process that you were almost playing it as the viewer.
Yeah, and that's that immersive experience I was talking about, is because the way we try to set this up, and when I'm operating camera, and I did probably half of that sequence, and then Nate Perry did the other half, and then we had a lot of operators doing stuff, but the lion's share was between the two of us. And what I told him was, like, when he was shooting some of the prison stuff, was we are the audience. So don't try to be the best cameraman and get the perfect shot. Try to react to, I mean, you have the advantage of knowing what's coming because you've rehearsed it and choreographed it, but try to react as if you're seeing this stuff for the first time, because that's what the viewer is going to react to. So when someone falls to the ground, you follow them to the ground. If you hear something, over to your right, if someone calls out, and you as an audience, if you want to turn your head, turn the camera, and it's not saying just go with you hear a bird and look over there and that's where the crew is. Like, it's all planned out, but in that planning, the feeling should be that it's like a first person experience, at least the camera is, where you're in there, and when Tyler falls to the ground, you follow Tyler, but then someone screams for his name, you look over at her and you're like, and then you're hearing a fight over here, it's like, oh, Tyler, and I look back over here. So we try to make the camera moves organic to the process, which one makes it very immersive and very kind of video game-esque, but two, lends itself in that style to hiding cuts, because many times when we do like a pan over or pass through something in the foreground, it's not a cut, it's just part of the the blocking of the scene. But sometimes it is, and then the challenge is, and I would love to play that, is be a drinking game. You put the movie on, and every time you find a stitch where it actually is, you got to do a shot. Yeah, there's a lot of them in there, so you probably have to do that over a series of nights, because at one time it would just get plastered.
Yeah. Well, speaking about the highly choreographed nature of it, does that still leave room for any spontaneity in the moment, or is it just so locked down? To
me, spontaneity comes from rehearsal, because it's like, and I use the example of a comedian, right? Like Robin Williams, one of the most amazing improvisational comedians to ever live. He didn't make that stuff up. He didn't walk on stage and just pull it out of the blue. If you watch his progression as a comedian, you see him testing jokes early. He's like, oh, that one worked. Hold on to it. So the more he did it, the more he had to draw on. So every time this amazing new improvisation came out, it is something he'd practiced and rehearsed, either at the very least in front of a mirror, but probably in front of audiences hundreds of times. And so, but he made it feel new. So similarly, on the film set, the more you can rehearse these scenes, the more you know them inside and out, backwards and forwards, everybody does, the more happy accidents you're going to get, because you have the freedom to do, to have a moment where there's an ad lib, or there's like, maybe there's a stumble, but you continue, and that stumble makes it feel more real. Like there's one, like two actually, two examples of that. One is, both are around the train, but one is inside the train when Rake is fighting with these two in the Ghazi, and it's once they've gone inside the tunnel, and it's a hand-to-hand combat. And there's a moment where, if you watch it, where the train kind of lurches and everybody stumbles.
Yeah.
Chris stumbles, the two stunt performers, the cameraman stumbles, but everyone does it at the same time. They all kind of look at each other and continue the sequence. And that's the one that made the movie, because it felt so real. It felt like, as an audience, you also lost your footing. And then you watched everyone recover, and then you kept going. We did multiple takes after that, because we were like, bumping the train, and we got to do it again. But upon looking at it in the editing room, we're like, actually, the feeling, again, it's all a feeling. Like, some of the other stuff wasn't as good, it wasn't as clean, but the feeling was real, and it was more immersive. And so that, a little happy accident. The point is, if that hadn't been rehearsed, meaning not the stumble, but if we hadn't rehearsed that, so they knew what to do, knew how to communicate with each other, they probably would have, they stumbled, everybody just stopped, put the camera down, cut. That's a mistake, let's try it again. But because it was so rehearsed, and they were so in the moment, it's part of it. The train moved, let's keep going. And so they were allowed, the rehearsal process and their familiarity with the moves and where the camera was going to be allowed them to just keep going and have this fun that really comes through the screen.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you've worked with Chris Hemsworth a lot over the years. Yeah. Avengers, Thor, 2 Extractions. Yeah. Is he the kind of person who wants to do his own stunts, or is he happy to hand things over to pros? He
is the consummate professional and the hardest working actor in show business. The reason I say consummate professional is he will do everything required of him to get the best shot or the best representation of the character. And he's very happy to sit back and allow his stunt doubles to go in and take like a hard hit. And he's like, I got a sore back. I got 3 kids. Bobby, get in there and give them hell. He's got no problem because he understands that the person who has trained their life to do this thing is probably going to do it better than him. And, it's safer. And if something happens, God forbid, nothing did on that show, thankfully. But if something happens, it's like, now we can, keep shooting because Chris isn't injured. That's literally the reason a stunt performer exists, is so that the actor isn't the one, getting hurt. And so in that sequence, he did 98% of all of it because it's on his face and it's required. So he's never complaining, saying like, oh, can't you just have the double do it in face replace? Nah, if he has to run 10 times, 100-yard dash carrying this little girl, which, over time gets heavier, he's gonna do it. Like, he's not complaining and being like, oh, make the stunt double do it. Or if it's like, just can't you put a cut in there because I don't want to be the back of my head. He'll do like we do on the train. And he runs. We see his face, but then he turns and his back's to us for a while. But he's like, but I move in a specific way. I want it to be me. And he climbed up on the top of a moving train with a helicopter, feet away from him, probably single-digit feet away. Just blades whirling, and he's up there holding the minigun, firing, and and he and I are doing this dance on top of the train. And that's him. And because, he's the closest thing to Tom Cruise that we have other than Tom Cruise, he gets out there and does so much of his stuff. And it's only the things that he is, it's not going to make the movie better by him doing it, or he's, going to risk injury. Yeah. Like, we lit him on fire. Normally that'd be the stunt double. And we talk about face replacement. He was like, nah, I want to do it. I want to get in there. And we talked about it and made sure it was safe. And he did it. He was, all night, he lit his arm on fire, and he was punching stunt performers while on fire.
You mentioned the chances of things occasionally going wrong. You must feel, as with your experience in stunt work and now your role as a director, you must feel a weight of responsibility for people's safety. Does that weigh heavily on you, or are you comfortable because you know that world so intimately?
Very much so. Ultimately, we're making movies. We're not, necessarily now we can inspire people and maybe save lives, but we're not curing cancer. We're not it's just entertainment. So ultimately, the end goal is to get everyone back to their, loved ones at the end of the day or the end of the shoot. So safety is hugely important to me. And because of my background, I've been in some, hairy situations and some spots where I've seen things go wrong. And so I've learned a lot of safety, implementations, and I would never want anyone or allow people to do stuff that I didn't think was possible to do safely. So I'm very aware of that. And there's times when, truthfully, that's one of the reasons why I operated camera on a lot of the fight sequence or the Wonder sequence on Extraction, the first movie, is because there were times where I wanted the camera to be in a position that I didn't feel comfortable putting a camera operator in. Not that they couldn't get the shot. And if things went well, they would have done it better than me. It's if things go wrong, do they have the wherewithal and practice to get out of that situation, as I know I do? And then say something happens, God forbid, and I don't get out. Well, then it's me. I put myself in that situation and I'm the one who's hurt and I can direct from a wheelchair. That's what's going through my mind. That's maybe not the most logical thing, but that's how I felt about it, which is why I, ended up doing a lot of the stuff where I strapped myself to the hood of a car. And there were times, which I think there's behind the scenes footage of where, the cars, they crashed. Like, it wasn't supposed to happen, but things went south and I was able to, move my foot or whatever it was that, I could do because of my time in the stunt world. And you have this, I'm watching in the monitor, sure, but all of my, I'm listening, I have my peripherals all taking in everything, the distance of the cars, where people are. So I'm not tunnel vision on the monitor. I'm seeing everything. But that comes from years of doing something, right? And that's where, I put on the second movie on Extraction 2, that's why I utilized Nate Perry a bunch, is because he is another stunt performer who's also a great camera operator. And I felt very comfortable with him in those spots because I've put him in some rough spots and seen him get out of them. They were rehearsed, but he knows his way around a film set and a camera very well. And so I felt comfortable allowing him to do certain things, and it allowed me to take a step back and view it from a 10,000 foot view, which is see all the different things, which was nice for a change. In the first one, and sometimes when you're operating, you get in there and you're so in it that it takes twice as long because you got to go watch playback so when you can sit back and watch it from afar, sometimes it's very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Extraction 2, I know a big focus for you guys was doing real stunts, right? It wasn't just putting it in later as CGI. Do you think there is going to be an ever-increasing hunger for reality, that which is organic and real, in a world where, it seems to be racing so quickly these days with virtual reality and AI and all that kind of stuff? Do you think there is going to be a switch possibly to more organic reality?
I think there already is, and I don't know if it necessarily ever went anywhere. I just think that the amount of CG and computer generated characters just kind of, caught up to the real life action. But with the Mission Impossible movies and the John Wick movies and Extraction movies, the success of those franchises, I think, is testament to audiences really enjoying real action performed by real actors and stunt performers. And it's something that I'm sure one day AI and CG is going to be good enough where you won't know the difference. You're going to look at it and be like, wow, that was incredible and it was completely fake.
But as a viewer, having a sense that there were stakes when it was being shot adds to the enjoyment of the
I think
piece.
so.
If it was just, it was all created on a green screen, they were just literally in Lycra and they was pointing at a tennis ball, it loses something.
100%.
And I know you've done a lot of that work, so I'm not doing it down.
100%.
But,
And it's still I don't know, it may get to that point because I think part of the, our reality is so interesting. It's, that's why AR is so interesting too, because it's all about perception, right? What we deem is real or sense is real is only real because we think it is, right? It's because that's how we perceive it. So I think what you're referring to, which I totally agree, is the feeling of you can still tell, like that. You can tell when you're like that one. Nah, that one was something was off, and you don't know why. Like a lot of times, I look at it, and go, nah, I question that. Part of it's skepticism because so much is CG these days, but part of it is this intuition in the human psyche that knows the difference because we, evolving over these millions of years to know the human body and the way it moves and the, motivations and all that stuff. Okay, what I'm getting at is once we arrive at a place where, and maybe we never will, and that would be great for us, great for stunt performers, great for directors who want to do it real. But if we ever do arrive at a place where it can be done and completely fool the human mind, that is real, and then what's to stop the stories around that of being like, yeah, it's real, and you won't be able to know the difference. Meaning, I'm not saying that people want to lie, but if you're told it's real, and it looks real, and it feels real, then you're like, then we're in trouble. I think that's way more larger implications in global politics.
Yes.
But that, I think it's heading in that direction. But until that time, I still feel to this day, the reason why people feel the difference is because the stakes, they know real people are doing that. And so they empathize. They're like, oh gosh, like that hurts because I've stubbed my toe before. So if falling down those stairs hurts more than that, gosh, that's crazy. And so there's an appreciation and a respect. It's kind of like even in like hunter-gatherers, you have like this warrior that does this crazy thing and takes down the saber-toothed tiger. There's a certain level of awe in that. And you go, wow, that's impressive, just from a human feat standpoint. So you have that going, and you have the sensibility that we as humans could still tell the difference between CG and real. And we'll always kind of gravitate towards the real, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. So we've got to wrap this up. I got to let you go. I could talk about this stuff all day long, but
so could I.
I will
I tell you.
But just finally, bringing it back to stunt work in particular, what would you suggest for those of our listeners who are interested in getting into this kind of line of work? Is there something? I mean, presumably it's different today than it was when you started. Like, what would you recommend?
Gosh, that is a great question to wrap it up with. But I would give, and I'll two-part this, but the first part, I would give the advice that I got when I was first starting stunts, and I just have to because I think it's great to pass it on. I was sat down and told by a former stunt performer, I think he's still doing it, but he said to me, son, if there's anything else you can imagine doing with your life, do it. Because this is a very difficult business, but physically, emotionally, mentally, it's hard on family, friends, it's hard on you. So if you can think of doing anything else, do it. But if you can't, if it's like this burning passion inside of you and that's what gets you out of the bed in the morning, don't let anyone stop you from pursuing your dreams. That's like that's the fortune cookie version. The practical application would be, if you want to make it a career, you're going to need certain skills. And a kind of what I term the bread and butter of stunt performing is, you can go, if you're a great motorcycle rider, or you're an amazing high diver, or like even a high level X Games athlete, there's specialties that you can get into. That is a way in. And oftentimes that's the fastest way in. Your bread and butter, even if you have those amazing skills, your bread and butter is probably going to be fighting and falling. Because that's, in quotes, cheap action. You'll get it on a TV show, you'll get it on a big movie, and those are things you'll be called to do over and over again. So the better you get at those basic skills that you'll be called to do over and over again, that's a great foundation to have. So a simple way would be, if you aren't already, a martial arts expert, just take a martial arts class, learn how to move your body. It could be gymnastics, like body awareness is important. Basic fight skills are important. Not like go get in a street fight. That's terrible advice. But martial arts or boxing or some form of fighting skill. And then I think one that's actually we did intuitively. This was before YouTube, before the internet, but one that you could do so long as you do it safely is imitating those who came before. Meaning, find your favorite fight scene on YouTube. Within reason, like don't get real karambits, don't use real weapons. Keep it simple and safe. Always be safe. But you can shot for shot kind of mimic the things that you see the masters do, and you'll start to learn why they do what they do, how they do what they do, and that's a really great way to kind of start and build confidence that you can also do those things. But again, warning, and you can put it on type it on the screen. Do not attempt to do these like crazy stunts and falls if you haven't been trained or are not in the presence of a trained professional. Just be safe. It can be very dangerous stuff.
Great. Well, we'll leave that with that last bit of safety information.
Always be safe. Safety
very important.
First. Yeah.
All right. Well, Sam, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Soundstage Insider podcast. Special thanks, of course, to Sam Hargrave, a fascinating insight into stunt work, stunt coordination, and directing. Definitely check out Extraction 2, which premieres in the US on June 16th on Netflix. And if you'd like to learn more about Sam, check out the show notes for links to his other projects. And you can also follow us on social media, Soundstage Insider on Instagram and Soundstage In on Twitter. Don't forget to check out our sister podcast, In the Envelope, which features fascinating interviews with actors from film, television, theatre, and yeah, it's really cool. So that's all from us this week. Thank you so much again for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.